So we've been getting a lot of questions recently all about plateaus and how to bust through plateaus, what plateaus are, especially in the context of fat loss and when you're trying to get into the shape of your life. Let's discuss plateaus, what exactly they are, why they happen, how to break through them, and how to navigate them so you actually avoid any plateaus in the future.
I think a good thing to start off with can be understanding whether you're actually in a plateau or not, because it can be an expectation that weight loss is just going to be a linear thing. So you're just going to see a new drop on the scale every single day. As we know, that's not the case. There's a lot of variables that can impact scale weight, which maybe we can go into in more depth. We definitely covered before. And so you can't, if just because the scale isn't dropping every single day consistently, it doesn't mean you're in a plateau. That's why we often recommend weighing yourself daily and then getting a weekly average to flush out those fluctuations across the week and give you a better idea of how your weight's trending, rather than actually going too deep on the daily readings. So if it's just been a couple of days, 2, 3 days, and you're either holding the same weight or weight might have gone up slightly, then you don't need to go to panic stations. It doesn't mean you've hit a plateau. It just potentially means you just need to be slightly more patient and wait to see if weight does then start to get moving.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's the expectations. People think that they have to be losing weight every single day, otherwise they're in a plateau, or the the notion of, oh, I don't want to step on the scale every day because I'm disappointed if I don't see the number go down. And it's just like, well, I think those expectations are a little bit, bit strewed, and you want to make sure that you are, as Ed said, you want to have that general trend moving in the right direction. And I don't know about you guys, I usually like a fortnight. I like to give like a certain parameters, like your cardio, nutrition, everything in check for about a fortnight, and then sort of reassess after that before making any sort of judgment call, whether we change something or we move something around. But that again is in the context of, have you actually been doing everything correctly for 2 weeks? Again, is another kettle of fish that we won't get into today. But yeah, when it comes to fat loss, a plateau doesn't really exist ever. You could literally continue losing weight until you die, which is
then you stop, then you plateau.
Then you plateau. No, but then you start decomposing, then you start going to the ground. So you technically never plateau.
Negative energy.
And then you're transferred into something else.
Yeah.
That will then go into a plateau potentially.
Yeah. I mean, you do transfer energies, right? So
yeah. So technically, you're never going to be fat loss. You just have to understand that it is a linear process, but it may not appear to be a linear process from day to day. If everything is in check, if everything is moving correctly, fat loss will continue to happen. And if it's not happening, despite being adherent to everything, and it's been like 10, 14 days without any sort of weird hormonal issues, okay, then you're not at a plateau, you're just at equilibrium, and something needs to change. That's all.
Yeah. I think with the rate of change, I'm pretty much in agreement. The only time I potentially do a bit faster, if adherence is bang on and you're approaching a deadline of some sort, then the need to go a little bit quicker could be useful if it's a genuine plateau. But like you said, for most people, they can continue going at quite a clip without worrying. It'd probably be useful to discuss like what sort of questions should you be asking yourself if you actually think you're in a plateau. Like if you're in a plateau, what do you need to be checking to see if you actually are, or if you have an adherence issue?
So I would say with regards to fat loss, the first thing to check would be your accuracy and consistency around your nutrition, whatever strategy that is. There's tons of research to show we're really bad when it comes to underreporting how much we eat, but on the flip side, in terms of activity, overestimating how much we're moving. So one being 100% accurate and consistent with your nutrition, so the calories coming in, but then also being 100% accurate and consistent with your activity levels as well. So whatever that's made up of, if it's resistance training, cardio, steps, whatever that is, just making sure that you are doing everything that you intend to be doing, whatever your plan is, because ultimately you're only going to get the results of a plan if you're actually following it. And like we said, that's going to be, I'm going to say 99% of the time, the reason for a plateau is adherence slipping rather than it actually being a genuine physiological plateau.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think under the category of adherence, so I think people just get too comfortable with not weighing foods, guesstimating, sneaking little things here and there, and just not thinking that it adds up. And yeah, as you mentioned, Ed, the research on how people sort of self-report dietary intake is actually astronomically horrible, even amongst dietitians, which is pretty crazy too. So that means
us.
100%. If we're not tracking, if we're not measuring, yes, we can guesstimate relatively okay, but if you haven't measured for a while, or if you haven't tracked for a while, it's very easy for your ability to do that to actually disappear a little bit.
So I had this experience myself recently. So I decided to stop, like, I was starting to eyeball everything, and my body weight was holding. So I was like, I'm not really concerned by the fact that I'm eyeballing. And then I just thought, out of curiosity, let me just measure everything. In my head, I thought I was having 10 grams of peanut butter, 15 grams of whey, 40 grams of oats. What I really having was 50 grams of oats, 25 grams of whey, and I think 15 to 17 grams of peanut butter. And luckily it wasn't doing any damage, but it was still like that sort of stuff adds up. If I was actually trying to lose body fat, that would cause me to it would cause me to plateau, in quote unquote.
That's it.
These past few days, I've just thought, let me just go exact to the gram and everything. And it's not that much different, but it just goes to show that even for us, like if you don't do it for a while, you can slip.
And that's just one meal, though.
Adverse effects.
Yeah, and that's just one meal. What about like other meals?
Exactly.
And then that accumulates over the week. And then it's like, or you sort of stop tracking your activity or whatever it is. And you're like, oh no, I've got 10,000 steps. And you look at it, it's like 100. Oh,
Well, one of the biggest things, think about once you get into shape and people consolidate, and then they either in muscle building or in maintenance, the biggest problem is they don't start tracking all the incidentals. Like the berries or the sauces, even if they're like not calorific, they suddenly become these slack. And then if your goal is maintenance, you suddenly find your body weight creeping up. But if your goal is muscle building, you could be gaining at a higher rate than you should be, and you're wondering why. But the reality is, instead of being in a 200-300 calorie surplus, you're suddenly in a 2,000-3,000 calorie surplus. A bit of an exaggeration, but
got to really overdo it on the berries to hit that.
Yeah. Chocolate dipped berries.
No, I think it's a really good point. And I think also just the way you're at kind of a maintenance level with all this experience as well. Imagine if you're relatively new to it, but also in a deficit. In a calorie deficit, you're going to be hungry for a while. Your activity levels are probably going to be quite high. The chances of you then looking at your rice and thinking, oh yeah, that is 50 grams. Whereas, if you're hungry, you're probably going to put a bit more on and think it's 50 grams. And so, I think there's definitely times when moving away from tracking can be beneficial, and it's not an essential for maintaining body weight, or you don't have to track to hit body, physique goals. But if you're on a fat loss phase, especially if you're relatively new to this, tracking consistently is going to make this process a lot more efficient for you.
And as we were saying, this is not, you don't have to track for the rest of your life, but you do have to sometimes tighten the reins a little bit every now and then, even if you have been maintaining for a while, if you've been in an investment phase. Ed, I know you're in an investment phase. Are you still tracking? You're still measuring your food, right?
Yeah, I track everything.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
But for me personally, it's not a big time or emotional or mental drain.
No.
I just, when I'm pouring stuff into a bowl, the bowl's just on a scale instead. And to be honest, I think it actually takes away more of a mental drain for me, because I'm not even having to think like, oh, is that right? Is that not right? Like, so, I mean, it's definitely not the only way you have to do it, for sure. And for some people, they prefer it and some people don't. But for me, it's just a way of just streamlining and minimizing decisions.
If you think about rice, for example, when you pour rice raw into a pot, it's impossible to know what it really is, right? But when it's on a plate, you can kind of gauge where it's at. But when you're cooking it, you have to be weighing it. Otherwise, it's just, there's no way you're going to be able to guess that, unless you're using like cup measures or things like that. But that's still a form of tracking. If you're literally just pulling out with your hand, going to the ththing and just throwing it in there.
And cups actually can differ depending on where you are, like the size of a cup.
Yeah. So, no, you can get those specific measuring cups.
Yeah, I know. Some of those measurements can be different here compared to the UK, compared to the US, and with those, you can still overdo it. You can still be like, oh, yeah, it's definitely a cup.
That's why the peanut butter is a great example of this, because it's the teaspoon, isn't it? Because I used to do years ago now, like before bed, I had like 5 teaspoons of cashew butter. I was like, yeah, like
Ooh.
nice treat. But when I actually think back, each teaspoon, because I was like, all right, I've got a teaspoon. I'm gonna get like, wanted to get my money's worth kind of
Yeah.
thing. So I was like scooping it would be like heaps up. It must have been probably like, it probably was legit 3 teaspoons.
A jar a night.
Yeah, I was going
Yeah,
through that
yeah.
stuff like nothing. But yeah, so 5 teaspoons was probably like potentially up to like 15 teaspoons or something like that across. So yeah, I think it's definitely a case for like our like human instinct to kick in and try and trick ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We are
Have you ever
wired that way.
have you ever tried a heaped tablespoon of peanut butter and seen how much that is? That's like 30, 40 grams. Just
Yeah.
just out of curiosity, you're just like, oh, how much is that?
Easy.
Because
Easy,
you,
yeah.
you normally the measurement is 5 grams a teaspoon and 15 grams a tablespoon or something like that for olive oil, right? But when you translate that to peanut butter, it's not the same.
Olive oil can just come off the spoon very easily. Not peanut butter. That stuff sticks. But on the topic of just the plateaus, that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
That if you are plateaued, you need to, or if you think you're plateaued, definitely go back to measuring everything 100% and making sure that you're in line, because it is very common and it's very easy that you have been letting things slip by and you have been potentially overestimating your calorie intake. So again, that's always my first course of action with anyone. And funnily enough, as soon as I do that, weight loss happens again without changing calories, without doing anything. Magic.
Ivan, you mentioned earlier about you reaching a state of equilibrium. Can you just explain that a little bit more for the listeners?
Yeah, I just like the word. It's sort of well, when we look at energy balance, we look at metabolism, whatnot. Fundamentally, means that your energy intake is now matching your output on a consistent basis. So remember, there's that whole relationship is dynamic every single day. Input influences your output, and your output can influence your input. And the thing is, we don't have to worry about that now, but over time, that it's if you are relatively in equilibrium across a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you will be maintaining your weight roughly. So that's what that sort of means. So your energy intake is matching your output.
The question we always get is, why does that happen? If you're in a deficit, how do you suddenly go in from a deficit to equilibrium?
Okay, that's a good question. So if we look at the 4 components of metabolism that we sort of can measure, you got your BMR, which is just the amount of energy needed to sort of keep you alive if you're laying in bed. Yeah, and you got your physical activity thermogenesis, so that's the sort of calories you burn during exercise. You have thermic effect of food, which is the amount of food you digest, or the amount of energy you spend digesting food. Got NEAT, which seems to be the most variable amongst all of them, which is your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Now, people have mistakenly thought that this is walking. They think this is walking, and it's like, no. That's still that you're purposefully going for walks, meaning that it's actually activity. NEAT can actually be things like fidgeting, moving around, uncontrolled movements that you actually have no conscious awareness of. And that aspect of metabolism still seems to be troubling many researchers into why that happens for some and why that doesn't happen for others. This is why we all have that one friend who's like eating all this food and just always like fidgeting, always really energetic, always moving around, burning a ton of calories, compared to someone who sort of just like, sits there and just responds badly to, yeah, exactly. And they've seen this in research, how different people respond to overfeeding. Some upregulate their metabolism like crazy to offset those calories. Some just go into a complete like coma and just absorb it all. Give it to me.
Yeah, that's like that one lean friend who's always lean but eats loads of food, right?
Yeah, exactly. But to answer your question, whether if you had a deficit at like 80 kilos and now you're 70 kilos and you've been eating the same amount of food, well, you're no longer in a deficit because number one, you're a smaller person, meaning that you require less energy from like a BMR perspective. For every step you take, you're burning less calories. For every bit of activity you do in the gym, you're also burning less calories per unit of time. So all those other thermic effect of food as well, that's also going to come down because you're eating less food. So all these things work together to sort of bring down your expenditure to a point, because your body eventually does want to conserve that as much as possible, right? Which is why as you get leaner and leaner and leaner and you get to lower levels of body fat, you are trying to push the extreme. And that's where things can seem like they're plateauing, or it feels like your return on investment just isn't worth it. Like what took us at the start of your cut, you only had to stay in a deficit, you didn't have to do much, you have to like increase activity quite a bit compared to what you did prior to get the same rate of loss going, or you need to do something a bit more drastic to get that same rate of loss going. And you're like, oh my God, this is crazy. And this is where you see some people who are bulking on like 5,000 calories thinking they're going to end their cut on like 3,000. They end up at like 1,200, or 1,300. It's pretty nuts. But then you got other people who sort of maintain at like, or they bulk and say 3,000, but then they end up cutting at like 2,000 and they get the same sort of body composition. That's me. Exactly right. Yeah, exactly. Like if I was to bulk, like I reckon I'll just get really, really fat, if I was to really push calories super high. But I could, I wouldn't have to go super low on the other end, right? So people have different metabolisms like that. And it's really interesting, how you respond on the way up is also how you respond on the way down. So this is where people like, I've got a slow metabolism or my like metabolic adaptation, et cetera, et cetera. It works both ways. So if you can eat a lot of food during a bulk and not continue gaining body fat, you're going to have that same problem on the way back. People just don't think of it that way.
So on the way down, what does that mean? You're saying you got the same problem?
Yeah. So you'd have to, because your metabolic rate adapts really quickly. It's also going to prevent. It's also going to make you have to eat less. As you go down. Go down. So you end up with less calories than you think.
Because I can maintain on pretty good calories. Like I reckon I know on my base plan, if everything's nailed, it's probably like 2.7, 2.8. But the base plan is I intentionally lower it because I know, I'll have like something a little bit different on the weekend. I'll eat a bit extra during the day. So I end up probably around 3.2, and I hold my body weight around that 3.2, maybe 3.3. But going down, I always need to go lower than necessary.
Not necessary. You go as low as you need to.
As low as I need to.
That's what it takes. That's what it takes. But there is always a range, right? There's always a range that you can sort of maintain. You could probably maintain quite easily between 2,800 to 3,200, right?
Yes.
But if you're like in your leaner stages, that range I think becomes a lot more narrow. Before you start gaining weight again.
When I reverse out of a diet, I always end up. So I go from like the last 2 ones I've done, like 1,400 finish off. And then when I come up, I don't end up seeing a scale really move much until I hit about 2,800. As soon as I hit 2,800, then I start gaining at a normal rate. It's really interesting to see that. Like I'm not thinking, like I'm eating so much food and I'm so lean. And then I tip it a little bit, and then it's suddenly like half kilo to a kilo a week.
Yeah. I think it's just there's some weird things going on around that time. And again, there's just very little research done on that. Like it's hard to sort of pinpoint. It's fascinating though. It's fascinating how different people respond there. And when you get that sort of depleted, right, obviously you're going to be refilling glycogen as well. You're going to be, you're also going to be obviously going to be storing fat again. That's always going to be a given. That people think that you're not going to be getting, when the whole notion of gaining muscle out of a completely shredded state, it's just like, no, because you're most insulin sensitive and this and that. It's like, do you know what else is insulin sensitive? Your fat cells. That's what's also insulin sensitive, because you have to be, you know what I mean? It would make no physical sense for the body to go, oh, actually, we have nothing on us. Let's start putting on more muscle. It's on no.
It is one of the craziest things that you can only get that period for about like. It's like the most amazing feeling though, right? Especially when you try and you peak for a condition once you bring your food up. So you don't peak at bottomed out rate. You peak almost on the reverse. I've done that. I did that last time. So I kind of like peaked at like 2.2, and then I carried on going, and I looked better and better and better. I looked 2-3 weeks later. I was like, oh my! I remember being I was in a hotel room, and I just had a shower. And I turned around and I had veins on my ass, and I was like, I've never seen this. I was like, why wasn't this there 3 weeks ago? I was like,
It's interesting, especially if you're that depleted as well.
I always miss the peak.
And I also found, this is just anecdotal, obviously, but the higher you can keep your activity on the way up as well. There does seem to be some sort of like I think it's called like a G-flux, where it's like your energy input is also matching your output. You got this super high expenditure, and then you're also increasing your calories as you come up. Because I remember a lot of people they would drop a lot of activity at the end of a cut while they bring food up. But then I was just like, well, why don't we just try? I want to keep my activity super high, and then we just keep that where it is, and then you just bring your calories back up. And I found that was incredible.
The only issue I find is after like after about 4 to 8 weeks of doing that, your legs just start feeling really numb.
Yeah.
And there needs to be that recovery period, and that's the sweet spot you need to find, right?
Yeah, I think it depends how hard you've pushed it in that lead up, isn't it? How sustainable or unsustainable kind of activity levels are gone.
It's as fun as it is eating all the calories, but when every time you get up, you feel like your legs just aching. It's like, oh, this is not a nice feeling.
Being lean. Yeah, no matter how you do it, shredded to shredded, 5% body fat is 5% body fat, and it's not a place for most people that they want to live at, you know. No matter how you do it, if you're eating 6,000 calories, but you're burning 6,500 calories, you're still going to be the same suck.
Yeah.
You know?
So yeah, that's it with plateaus, I think. What was that?
Yeah, what are we talking about? Plateaus?
And then we just ended up talking about. Yeah, but I think it's
metabolism.
It's an interesting thing because metabolism. It's all linked to metabolism, isn't it? Plateaus.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You're just manipulating all these different variables.
I think it's important to know though. Sorry, just with metabolisms and the different how individuals will adapt at different rates and in different ways. It doesn't mean, just for anyone listening, that a calorie deficit doesn't work or that it works for some people and not other people. It just means that what you need to do to get into a deficit may be different for you than to other people. So the whole notion around energy balance still applies, but it's just how each person's body adapts in terms of metabolic adaptation during, say, a fat loss phase that will just determine what a deficit is for you versus your friend who has really high levels of NEAT, for example.
Yeah,
and what percentage do you aim for personally?
What was that?
When you guys diet individually, what sort of body weight do you expect to drop each week individually? What have you found when you've dieted?
The leaner, I personally like the slower approach. So I would go potentially either 0.5 or 0.5 to 0.75% body weight. That's percent. Not
so
kilos.
Is that what, like 0.6 kilos for you then?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's pretty slow.
Yeah.
What about you, Ed?
General, I like to shoot more for around a kilo, which is over 1% for me. So yeah, if I'm lean, like ready for a shoot, it's probably around 69 kilos. So I started about 80, so it's like probably like 0.7 would be 1%. So looking at maybe like 1 to 1.5% a week, maybe something like that.
The whole way through.
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely at the beginning. It'd probably slow down a little bit at the end, but even then, like, to be honest, I know when you think of like natural bodybuilders who are dieting for like maybe 6 months, they then drop into like maybe like 0.5% or even less than that a week sometimes. But to be honest, I don't go that slow, to be honest, just because I just don't like to draw it out that long to that. If I'm honest, really.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think mine's always been about a kilo a week as well. It's very predictable as well. It's like as soon as you hit, it's always slow, a little bit slow at the start. Once you get into the stride, it's like a kilo a week, so predictable, and it always happens on the same days, and you know when it's coming. And then towards the end, like it doesn't really drop off much either for me because I just keep going. It's probably because I'm just continuing to push the deficit really hard, and that's probably the reason why I end up lower than for example you.
Yeah.
You just go slower.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. That's the thing is there are many ways to skin a cat or skin a human to nothing, but it's whatever works for you and whatever way you like to tackle a diet. So,
but then if you think back to the examples you said, Ivan, you can be in a deficit on relatively high calories. So potentially for you taking a bit slower, spending more time at say 2,000 calories isn't such a bad thing. Whereas say Akash, if you're on like 1,300 calories, you may want to go a bit more aggressive because you're not going to be able to. You don't want to stay there for as long in terms of that low food intake.
The other thing is, I think it also depends on what you start with. Right? If you're starting quite high body fat, it's obviously a benefit to going a bit quicker than if you're quite low, because if you're already quite lean, you don't want to be going too quick because of that potential to.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I've never got like fat. So
yeah, it's all very interesting. Next time when I diet, I do want to play with trying a little bit higher calories, but also more than that is actually doing a bigger almost reverse before I hit a peak. Because I'm always too conservative with that in that final area. I'm always like, I don't know if I think I'm always going to spill over, and then it never happens. And then I'm always like, I should have done it. Because then 3 weeks later, I'm looking amazing. So I think that's what I want to experiment with next time, whenever that next time is. maybe next year.
Yeah, it's good. It's good fun. It's very interesting though. It is very fascinating. And yeah, as the point that Ed brought up, which it was a fantastic caveat, no matter how your metabolism adapts, because everyone's metabolism adapts to some extent as they diet, it's all part of it. To say that it's nothing to do with you having a slow metabolism, you don't have a broken metabolism, it's fine. How quickly it adapts is individual, but it doesn't prevent you from losing body fat ever. You can still continue losing body fat. You just have to understand how your body works. Some bodies need changes relatively frequently, some don't. And those are the sort of metabolisms that aren't very adaptable, that you can just make one change at the start and people just continue losing weight for a long time before they have to start making other changes. So it depends. It depends. Hate that answer, but it is what it is.
Well, I think it'll be gone, Ed.
So I was just going to say, these adaptations as well become a lot more pronounced when you get to legit levels of leanness. If you are someone who's come from, say, 30% body fat, you've gone down to 20, there's not going to be huge differences. I mean, because you've lost likely a good amount of just absolute weight, you're going to require less calories to maintain your body weight. But these kind of metabolic changes where your body is really trying to preserve what you have is going to occur more when you are very lean rather than, say, 20% body fat.
I think a good segue from here would be discussing the concept of recomp and it being, can you gain muscle when you're in a deficit? Because there's obviously there is that element of, I'm not losing body weight, so maybe I'm just building loads of muscle. So let's discuss that effect when it actually happens, because it can happen when it does happen, and when you're just kidding yourself into you're eating too much peanut butter, really.
Yeah. So mechanistically, it can definitely happen. We see it happen all the time. We've seen it happen with our clients, with their photos. We've all seen it happen in person to some extent. To say it doesn't happen is just dumb, and it's just people that haven't trained people in person. I think what gets exploited is the amount that people can recomp. That's probably what gets exploited the most. But from a mechanistic standpoint, it can happen, especially if you have a lot of body fat on you to begin with. If you're 30% body fat, you have a lot of resources that your body can tap into, like an energy resource. So when you understand, okay, what goes into building muscle, obviously we've got the stimulus, we need amino acids, which we can get through the diet easily. We need water, which we can get through the diet, hopefully. And we need energy. And that energy can come from either carbohydrates or fats, whatever. If you have an adequate amount of body fat on you, because the thing is, muscle and fat are two different compartments in the body. They're not the same. You know, when people go, oh, my muscle turned to fat. Or, it's like, no, it didn't. But I know what you're trying to say. So if you can draw energy from your fat stores to fuel your muscle growth, because you've stimulated your muscles to actually grow and want to build, then yes, technically in that scenario, because you have a lot of body fat on you, your body is happy to give that up to feed muscle building in that specific scenario. And this is where recomp can happen more frequently in people who are overweight. Now, this sort of notion diminishes as someone does get leaner and leaner and leaner, because the relative energy stores start to go in favor of, okay, you're getting more muscle mass, your body fat's getting lower and lower and lower. It would not make any physiological sense for the body to recomp when you're 6% body fat. You have nothing on you to recomp, or even 10%, 15%, you know what I mean? Like when you start to get into those single digits, recomp's not going to be happening. You get it. In fact, you're probably losing lean mass at that time. And that's fine. That's okay. Like we're all going to be losing lean mass as a natural by that time. But how much lean mass you lose will all come down to how hard you're training, how well you're managing recovery, your deficit, etc., etc. So there are definitely things that you can do, but yes, so recomp, to answer the question in a very long-winded way, recomp can happen if you're relatively overweight and if you're relatively new to training as well. It's probably another.
I was going to say that's the other one that is if you're not that trained or you haven't trained for a while, or you hear the stories of, like, let's say for example we didn't train for a year, and then we take a picture of ourselves, and then 6 weeks later we take another picture. Yeah, you're going to recomp because we just lost a lot of muscle that you previously had. So that's
by my program.
Was that?
6-week transformation by my program.
Yeah. I mean, that's a massive one. Is when trained people untrain them, detrain themselves, and then retrain themselves. Of course, you're going to recomp. I've had that a few times in my life. I remember like thinking, I think it was the start of 2019, especially. I wasn't very focused on my training. I created that focus, and lo and behold, I stayed the same body weight for about 6 weeks, but I looked noticeably different. It wasn't because I did anything different. I just retrained some old muscle mass. The other thing is for beginners. I think beginners can definitely recomp. But if you've literally got no experience and you got those newbie gains coming towards you, then you can build muscle mass and lose body fat at the same time. But again, only for a certain amount of time. It's not going to last forever. But you can do it for a decent amount of time. And I think we always see it in person a lot more than online. I think
Correct.
we attest to that, especially when you're doing body fat calipers. You can really see that sort of unravel. The only other time which is manipulated in the market a lot is glycogen manipulation, where people manipulate glycogen to show that the body weight is the same and they've recomped muscle mass and fat mass, but the reality is they've just manipulated carbs to play with their body weight. That's done quite often.
You could have said the same thing when you came out of your contest prep, right?
Yeah.
So I'll recomp.
Yeah.
No, you just regained lost lean mass.
Yeah. Exactly that. So that's recomp in a nutshell. I don't think there's much more to add to that. And the other way, obviously, is if you're on steroids. That's probably the best recomp.
Yeah. I think that's where the maybe like misunderstanding and misalignment with reality comes, because if you do follow like professional bodybuilders, you'll hear them, like in contest prep, and their body weight's just holding, but each week there's such noticeable changes. Whereas in reality, like that's not going to happen for a natural. But yeah, like you said, if you're completely new to training or you've taken a break from it, you're still providing yourself with this novel stimulus, got adequate protein coming in, and you have got adequate calories, even if you're technically in a deficit, all that body fat on you is stored energy. So yeah, there's no reason why you can't build muscle in that situation.
So there's a period where I follow this. Go on, Ivan. You go.
I was going to say, Pilko, remember what we spoke about the other day when these IFBB pros are like making video commentary saying, yeah, man, during contest prep, my metabolism just continues speeding up. And I just got to keep eating. I got to keep eating more and more and more. Otherwise, I just disintegrate. It's like, what? No, that's not how it works, But it works if you're taking thyroid, and it works if you're taking, if you're taking everything that gets suppressed as a natural when you diet, then it's understandable. But if that's the message being pushed across to like just people watching YouTube, being like, oh, so that's how you do a contest prep.
I think the thing I was saying to you was literally the guy was saying the leaner he got, the more he had to eat. And he was saying his calories started like 2,500, but as he was lean, it was up in like 5,000 or something. I just had to turn it off. I was like, there's no wonder people are so deluded out there, is there really?
Well, when I used to follow a lot of geared up bodybuilders, I used to see, the whole grow into your show. That was a big thing. And it was a whole thing. I used to see people like, oh yeah, I'm starting my show prep at 220. Projected stage rate is 250. I was thinking to myself, what am I missing out here? I wasn't too clued up on the steroid stuff. I was thinking, what am I doing wrong here? Like, how do I gain 30 pounds when on a diet?
Well, when you do your bicep curls, you got to make sure you squeeze the contraction and then lower down slowly. That's how you do it.
Yeah. And then the natural segue from here would be muscle building plateaus. So we've done fat loss, done recomp, and the concept of muscle building plateaus. Like, when do they actually kick in legit? How do you actually know you're in a muscle building plateau? Because it's so difficult to actually track muscle mass. And what do you do to try and break through?
Yeah, I think these are a lot more nuanced and harder to track than say like a body weight loss or a fat loss plateau for sure. Because one, the scale isn't going to be as useful. I think it's still definitely useful to use it as a metric, but obviously if you're in a surplus, you're potentially gaining body fat as well as hopefully muscle. So although weight may increase, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's more muscle. Likewise from just visuals, like so if you're looking at photos or videos, again, it's not going to be as clear just because the amount of muscle you're building on a weekly basis is going to be so small, and if body fat levels are higher as well, it's just not going to be quite as clear. So the main thing I would use here overall would be the logbook, and making sure that performance in the gym is progressing. And then also just I personally use weight and then also photos as well, just as like secondary measurements, just to give myself just a bigger picture of how everything's going.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think it becomes a lot more nuanced in an investment phase, and you're not going to be able to see your muscle grow. If you thought fat loss was frustrating, you got nothing coming when it comes to muscle building. But the best way to track muscle building progress, in my opinion, as Ed said, is also your performance in the gym, your performance across a few key indicator lists, especially, and are you improving with load and reps over time? And if you've been doing the same exercises for a while, if you've been doing the same program for a while, and things are still progressing on a performance standpoint, it's a pretty good indicator that you are still gaining muscle mass at that stage. So keep doing what you're doing. If things do plateau on that, and again, I wouldn't, visuals and scale can tell you part of the story, but during a muscle building phase, the logbook is going to be the thing. Logbook along with technique videos. I think that's probably a good caveat, because it's very common for people to increase their numbers on the logbook, and then they look at their form 12 weeks later and they've reduced their range of motion by half. It's like, so I think that would be form audit would be the same thing with regards to a plateau audit. So go back, have a look at, are you actually performing these lifts the way that you should be, that you're plateaued on? So if you've noticed a stall in performance, I would sort of have muscle building and performance plateaus pretty much the same. If you're not performing better, it's a safe bet to say that your muscle building is probably you're not getting bigger unless you're super fatigued and carrying. Anyway, we're not going to get into that. So I would go back and have a look. Are you performing these lifts correctly from a technique standpoint? If yes, okay, you may be at a plateau here and something needs to change, whether that's changing the rep ranges, whether that's changing the load, whether that's changing the way that you progress this exercise. Something does have to change. But I think a lot of people make the error of changing things too soon without actually reassessing their technique, because technique does seem to go to trash if all you're trying to do is focus on the logbook.
This is actually my biggest pet hate, because we promote a lot the principle of progressive overload, and I think this is where, like, in the industry, it gets really confused, because the idea of progressive overload is a principle of training. It doesn't matter what your style of training is, you just have to do more over time, whether that's in terms of volume, in terms of load, whatever it is. You just need to do more, and that could be in cardio as well, just to get better. I guess anything in life, you have to do more in order to keep progressing. But there also is a style of training which is then coined progressive overload, which people seem to view as just putting more weight on the bar each week. And so there's almost this thought with, if I'm following the principle of progressive overload, then I just need to keep putting weight on the bar. And ultimately, we know that you can't just do that indefinitely. And so in order to be able to keep doing that, form has to go, range of motion has to cut down in order just to allow you to keep handling greater loads. Whereas in reality, to actually implement the principle of progressive overload, the other variables have to be constant. So things like form have to stay good. And so an increase in reps or an increase in load is only true progress if form has remained good. Just because, like Ivan said, you've added that extra rep, it's only an added rep if form is good. It's only more weight if form stays good. And that's something that I just think gets just confused with the whole progressive overload thing, that it's like, I thought you guys said we needed to be doing progressive overload. It's like, yeah, not at the expense of technique. So yeah,
that's overload with perfect form.
Yeah, perfect form is part of progressive overload.
Yeah. It has to be a consistent thing. It has to be consistent amongst all the exercises.
Do you think, here's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, is, when you're advanced, so like I'd say we're in the advanced bracket, we're training for a while, hard training for consistently. Do you think if you stay at sort of maintenance calories or thereabouts, you are making progression in the gym, that you'll see changes in your physique?
I think so. As long as your nutritional strategy is fueling better performance, you know what I mean? If you're still progressing in the gym from a performance standpoint and your calories are around maintenance or whatever, then I would say that you're still getting better. You're still improving your physique, because as you get advanced, your surplus needs aren't as crazy as you think. Many people think, I just got to keep pushing more and more calories. No, you're just going to be gaining extra body fat. Your surplus amount doesn't have to be excessive when you're advanced. The other way around.
Go on.
I was just going to say, I think it depends on where your body comp's at as well, though. Like if you're in a maintenance at 8% body fat, then you're probably not going to be in a good position to do that. If you then push body fat levels, like body weight up, and like some body fat's going to come along with that. so you're in maybe a more productive zone for you, whatever that is for the individual, to build muscle and then maintain there, then I definitely think so.
Because I've noticed that in the more advanced people, you just get changes. This is all anecdotal. You just get changes in like the look. Like the look just starts to shape. When you start, we were talking a couple episodes ago or a while ago about like dense muscle and thick muscle and all these sorts of things. But from an anecdotal point of view, do you think people's like look of the muscle can change over time with more and more training effect? And this is like advanced people who've really trying to get that last bit of muscle mass out of their genetic potential.
Muscle maturity.
Yeah.
I think a physique can definitely look grainier as someone gets older. I think that's a combination of I don't know if that's a combination of muscles getting more dense or whatnot. I think that's just a combination of the skin getting a little bit thinner,
okay.
just from getting old.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a good question. I think there's people who've been training heavy for a long time. There is a certain look they have, but I think if you were to actually skin them and have a look at their actual muscle fibers, I don't think there'd be any like difference.
I think from a scientific point of view, there'll be nothing. I think this is purely anecdotal speaking.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I do think though that this is an area that even like the science crowd, the fitness industry, it's almost accepted that there is this kind of muscle maturity or is a different look. But I don't think science has explained it. And so I think if you talk to someone like the good scientists in the area, I think they wouldn't dismiss it, but they wouldn't be able to explain it at the same time.
It exists. They can't explain why.
It's like I notice now when I look at myself sometimes, I'm like, that look wasn't there a couple of years ago. And I'm lifting not massively amounts heavier than I used to. And my body weight is roughly the same. But there's just certain bits which just look better. And I just think either my eyes are deceiving me or which could be happening. But then I look at pictures as well and I'm like, actually, it looks better here. Or it's like when I sent you guys the pictures recently, you're looking leaner. And I'm thinking in my head, that's the same body weight I've been for about a year now. So I was like, what am I actually looking leaner or what? Like,
good lighting.
Yeah, but the thing is, I'm very strict with these things. I always turn the blinds down.
I know you are.
Yeah, same. Yeah. So this is where that's what gets me thinking. I'm like, is there something here? I don't think science has explained it. I don't think it's something we can explain because you need so much long-term data to support it. If that makes sense, and you need a lot of conditions aligned.
And we've gone through COVID, right? So like, you haven't been able to train at your max for a while. You know what I mean?
I would say though, looking at your photos anyway, because I thought that was quite a, considering you're not in a fat loss phase, I thought it was quite a drastic difference. And if body weight has remained the same, then I would say you've pushed up into a level where you had some excess body fat. Like you weren't fat by any means, but you're in an area as a good kind of zone for you to grow. You've kept giving that stimulus, and I would say that that's a good example of just recomping in that slightly higher body weight, because body weight's stayed fairly similar over time, but your body fat levels appear to be lower.
Because one thing that I have, again, this is all I know, but when you push up to new body weight classes, and this is something a muscle builder should really pay attention to, is when you push up to new body weight classes, there's power in holding body weight there before you do any sort of cut, because your body likes to settle in the new muscle mass. And again, I don't know what the science is on that, because it's very, very much anecdotal that, when you move to new body weights, you almost have to do a consolidation at that higher body weight. And if you almost milk the body weight, in quote unquote, milk the body weight, you see a better look emerge over time.
You're trying to move your set point.
Yeah.
Same thing, right? Same thing's like a body fat thing. There is your environment and your behaviors can alter this settling point. People think that this is purely like genetic and that's it, but it just like on the way down, it can be altered on the way up too. And I think there is definitely merit in holding a certain weight, holding a certain look for a while, and not hitting the panic button because you think you've gone too fluffy. You may get, let's say you hit January and you look fluffy, but you stay at that weight for like 6 months. I bet you're going to look better at that same weight 6 months later.
Yes.
I think that's what you're trying to say, right?
And that's one of the most productive things you can do in investment phase, because in that period of 6 months, you don't diet your calories, you keep your calories high, and you just focus on performance, and you milk a body weight for as much performance as you can get out of it. And suddenly your body just starts, and this is especially for women as well, I think, their bodies just start to evolve into a new trajectory.
I think you touched on a really important point there that I think would be very good for people to understand is, when people are always like, oh, what rate of gain should I be looking for on the scale in an investment phase? Don't look at the rate of gain on the scale. Look at the rate of gain in the gym. Use that as your rate of gain. Because if that is going up, then you are doing your job with regards to calories, regards to recovery, etc., and your body weight would just be a byproduct of that. And if your performance continues to go up, again, as I said, body weight will also go up or stay the same as is. And if you do hit a plateau, and if your performance now starts to tank in the gym, then okay, you may either do a little bit of a plateau audit, or you may just need another bump in calories. And then you aim to make more gains in the gym, and then your weight will start to do what it does.
Yeah.
But so your weight is just a byproduct. The weight is just a proxy to your performance in the gym.
One thing,
not the other way around.
One thing I went through in the last 18 to 24 months is I've given up on the idea of going back to 90 kilos. Like, I don't want to be bulking at that body weight, 87 to 90. Like, I know I'm strong as hell at 87 to 90 kilos. But what I started doing is, like, I don't want to go back to that body weight because I just didn't like how that made me feel. But I was like, okay, I'm going to look at all my PRs from that time, and I'm going to try and get them here. And up till the start of lockdown, I actually got to the point where, except for the RDL, which I was about maybe 5 kilos off, I got all of them and more at 8 kilos less. And I just spent like 18 months trying to do that. Like, for example, with floor press, when I was at my strongest at 87 or so, I got like 50 for, I think 7 or 8. And then I think this year I got 50 for not when I was before lockdown, like 50 for 9 or 10. But at 8 kilos less. And I knew, and that for me, that's a massive element of progressive overload. People that also don't miss is, people also miss is that it just goes to show the body weight factor is not the most important. It's actually it's more around performance. And if you can start creating these sorts of goals, you can really keep your long-term muscle building phase, which most people should be in a period of progression all the time. It keeps it more exciting. It keeps it more interesting.
It's a very good point. It illustrates that perfectly. You're focusing on your performance. You got 2 reps extra at 8 kilos lighter with the same load, which means you're probably just carrying excess body fluff that you just didn't need.
But then in some lifts they give you that, but there's also the element of, like, for example, I've not been able to get to my best RDL yet still. And I think there is an element of leverage as well. Like, I will get there, but it's just going to take longer. Like, I know it hasn't helped that I've not been able to lift heavy in RDLs for a consistent period of time, but
you probably didn't have the same range of motion with your stomach in the way.
That's very true. That is very true. Although when I do RDL, I really do push my belly. I do push the belly out. The whole
it's good.
Bracing, right?
The bracing,
No, I think then in terms of when you do hit a plateau with your performance in the gym, though, it's not that you've had one bad session or you haven't progressed one set, and you don't. We all have a time when we come in, we want to, progress our squat. It doesn't happen that day. We get pissed off, but that doesn't mean that you've hit complete plateau and everything needs to, change. A real plateau, I would say, on a lift, I give it 3 weeks before I even really. Worry's not the right word. It annoys me if I don't progress it, but not to the extent that I'm worrying about it after the session or anything like that. If it's 3 weeks in a row and there's been no progression there, then it's potentially time to look at other stuff. And first off, it would be recovery side of things. But if everything else is in check, then maybe adjusting either calories or potentially even just like changing the rep range or something like that.
The thing is with that is, and I think this is what everyone needs to take that trial and error mindset, because everyone will respond differently to that plateau. For example, like the one you've listed there, recovery could be a thing, nutrition could be a thing, but most cases I find is that you just need to almost recycle the lift a bit and take away that fatigue factor that you've probably been pushing the envelope so high on that lift that you've incurred a lot of recovery debt. But for other people, it might just be they need an extra 200 calories and that will take them to the next level. So understanding, I think this is where the trial and error, and you have to do this yourself, that thinking of like, how does my body actually respond, and really being in tune with it and trying different things so you understand how your body works in a long-term progression state.
Yeah.
I do think, though, the biggest thing for probably most people when it comes to a plateau in in training is one going to be form, like Ivan said, but if form is really good, is then just going to be effort levels. Because so often people, I think, get to a point where they think, oh, I just can't progress this. But then if you look at a video of it or you see them training in the gym, as soon as it starts to hurt, that's the end of the set. And there has to be just a realization that if you want to progress and actually change your physique, you're going to have to work hard. And so the more comfortable you get with just working hard and embracing that kind of, good pain, the more progression is going to come, because ultimately like effort levels and form are the biggest things. And often you don't need more calories. You just need to work harder.
The other interesting thing with the whole 3-week rule is, and I agree with it for the most part, I think there's also some lifts where you end up making progress when you just stick with something for a while, and then 6 to 8 weeks later, bam, you're into a new rep range and you can up the weight, but it just takes so long for your body to kind of learn that weight and that rep. But again, this is only on some lifts. Like for me, it's an RDL. Like I can't, if I was to think in 3 weeks time on a plateau, no, I've just not acclimatized to the weight enough. But in other lifts, it's definitely that rule does apply. But again, it comes to that trial and error mentality that you need to have in what you're doing.
And at your level of advancement as well, especially with a lift that you are very advanced with, you do have to use a strategy like that, because you cannot expect a rep increase or a weight increase every week. So being able to stay at the same weight for say 4 to 6 weeks, I think we mentioned this a while ago. Let's just say in week 1 that set of RDLs for say 10 was like you could not do one more rep with that weight, right? But then if you stick with that weight for like 6 to 8, even 10 weeks, but now at the end of 10 weeks, you're like, oh, I could have done 2 more at the end of my set, even though you didn't. You have actually progressed, right? You've got stronger while still using the same and reps for 10 weeks, but the rate of perceived like effort or the reps in reserve is now more, because you could do more at the end of, say, again, week 1 you do 140 for 10 or something like that. Now in week 8 you do 140 for 10, but you still had like 2 or 3 in the tank. So even though your numbers didn't increase in the logbook, you technically got stronger. You know what I mean? Because now you're using reps in reserve. You're using a qualitative measure as well as quantitative measures.
The thing around that, and what you said, Ed, around effort level, even sometimes there's that mental burnout of a lift, of getting so, we're talking about for ourselves probably around here. So, I've been telling you guys around my Bulgarian split squat, I'm feeling like almost burnt out by the idea of trying to progress that. So what I did this week is I took all the bands off and let me look at let me take the vest off and everything. I was like, let me look at the old log book entry that I had when I was just doing just the dumbbells I have in my hands versus vests and bands and all these sorts of things. And I thought, okay, the goal I got 12. So I thought, all right, let me try and beat this. And I hadn't done this for about 3 to 4 months probably, because I've been trying to go in the low rep ranges. I ended up getting 14 reps with a rep in reserve. And I was thinking, that's pretty solid. Like over the last 3 to 4 months, there's been progression in that lift, even though I thought I'd maxed it out, but I've actually not. And now I'm going to try and eke out more in that rep range. So it's just another example for people listening that progression come in different forms. And
it also shows if you do hit a plateau, like you said, how you navigate through it will be different for different people. Some of it's just going to come down to mindset. If you just feel burnt out from progressing that variation, just making a little tweak like that might allow you mentally to keep progressing, whereas someone else might just be able to keep going with that same variation potentially.
Interesting stuff. I think that's everything on plateaus. We can wrap it there. So if you're listening, we've covered fat loss plateaus, recomp, and muscle gain plateaus. So after listening to this, there should be no more plateaus and only progression.